Welcome back to another episode of the Base Talk podcast. I am your host, Jacob Billingsley, owner and founder of Base Sports Performance in Hernando, Mississippi. In this episode, we are going to discuss how we prepare our pitchers for the upcoming season, whether it be our elite pitching group for high school, our college athletes coming back home for the break, or our professional athletes home for their off season. All right. Welcome back. So as I mentioned in the intro, today we are going to discuss how we set our pitchers' throwing programs up to get them ready for the season, whether that be our elite high school group, collegiate group, professional group, whatever it is. So one thing I do want to note, as hopefully, there's been some sort of shutdown or recovery period prior to starting our on-ramp phase. So in one of our recent episodes, I discussed a little bit more in depth how to determine how long to take off and when to take that time off and how to structure that time off. So if you have not heard that episode, go back and listen to that one because that was going to be a very good episode to provide some context to this one. So, pretty much we recommend anywhere from, 2 to 4 weeks usually time off. And again, that is assuming that there's been no injuries, that we didn't have a huge spike in, amount of innings we threw this year, things like that. So just generally anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, up to 6 weeks at some points, especially if, it was a very high, inning cap year compared to the year prior, or if there's any nagging injuries in the throwing arm or things like that. And one thing I want to note here that I don't think I noted in that one is the longer time that we take off, the earlier in the off season we want to start that process. So what I mean by that is, if we're a guy that, is wanting to take, 6 weeks off and, we wait until the very end of fall ball, which is, around here is, late October, maybe into November, maybe. If we wait 6 weeks from there, we're now mid to late December, right? And that shortens our on-ramp period. And what happens a lot of times, especially, you see these injuries in spring training or earlier in the year, with pitchers or even position players in professional ball, is that the guys take too much time off and then they try to on-ramp really quickly. And when you on-ramp really quickly, you're putting a lot of additional stress on your body that it's not necessarily ready to handle just because we're trying to do it in such a short amount of time. So we recommend being able to start your throwing program at the minimum of 12 to 16 weeks prior to the season. So ideally more around that 16-week mark. And again, that's just to give us, ample amount of time to build the throwing capacity, build the throwing intensity, gain back our skill, gain back our motor control, motor patterns, things like that. So, a lot of times guys will, again, shut down very late or for a long period of time, especially early high school guys, and they're shutting down, a long time, going back to that, however many, 12, 16 weeks. And, not only are we, allowing our muscles and tendons and ligaments to adapt to no stress or little stress compared to what it's been on, which is not a good thing. It's a negative thing because of, if you take, 3-4 months of the year off from playing catch at a higher level, your body's going to adapt to not playing catch. It's going to adapt to lower stress levels. And then as soon as we start that on-ramp phase, those stress levels increase dramatically compared to what it's been doing the last 3 to 4 months. And again, that is going to risk a little bit higher injury. So that's why we do not recommend that much time off, again, unless there is some sort of, injury that we need to discuss there. But for the most part, 12 to 16 weeks is as long as we want, from when we begin playing catch again after our shutdown period until season begins. So how we structure, our elite pitching group, high school group, and professional groups is pretty similar. The collegiate guys is a little bit different because obviously, we're getting them. They don't really have as much of an off season, as the professional guys do or as some of these high school kids do. So, the collegiate guys will get in, for, maybe 3 days on Thanksgiving break, and then maybe, 2 to 3 to possibly 4 weeks, during winter break. So those guys don't have quite as much time to build up as our elite high school and professional groups. But, also when they get back and we have them during Christmas break, at that point, we probably need to already be, on our own ramping period. Because again, a lot of these colleges are starting mid to late February. So all of December, we're in the on-ramp phase, right? We're preparing the arm for a long season. Most of these guys are going to go play summer ball or, professionally. So, we need to be prepping that arm for the next, 10 months. 10 plus months. So, we don't quite have as long of a time frame as with those collegiate guys as we do with our elite level high school and our professional groups. So that's something to consider there. As a college athlete, obviously we have to, train them differently, and they're all in different spots when they come back from their colleges. Some of them, just finished fall ball. Some of them finished fall ball a couple months earlier. Some of them, are in a shutdown period, and some of them are in an on-ramp phase. So that's where us as coaches in our collegiate groups, when we see them over Thanksgiving and winter break, that's where we kind of sit down with each of them and kind of make, individualized plans for the next couple of weeks while they're home for the break. Some of them, come home with a throwing program, which we will help them with. And a lot of times we will alter that depending on how they feel, just because we see them every day during the break, and we can kind of have a gauge on how they're feeling and how they're responding and how they're looking and things like that. And we can make those adjustments during the winter break for our college athletes. But for the most part, again, those elite level high school and our professional groups, we're really looking to start playing catch that 3 to 4 month period, 12 to 16 week period prior to the season following a shutdown period. So pretty much what I want to go over is how we structure our elite pitching group. And again, this is pretty much with our professional as well, but I'm going to really be speaking towards our elite pitching group, high school group. So month one, or phase one, I should say, is the build-up phase, right? Roughly 5 to 6 weeks. That's from zero. These high school groups, we have our high school elite pitching groups shut down for a minimum of 3 weeks, usually 3 to 4. And that's usually going from, the second week of October to the second week of November. Some of the guys will play in some later fall tournaments or showcases towards the end of October, in which case we push their, on-ramp period back just a couple of weeks. So for the most part with this elite pitching group, we all began on November 6th for our first phase. And the guys that are, had a little bit later fall, we push them back a couple of weeks, and they're going to start on November 20th. So as we talk, we're currently right in the middle, of phase one for these guys, getting ready for phase two here shortly for the elite pitching group. And really what we're doing for that first 5 to 6 weeks is we're rebuilding the throwing capacity. We are rebuilding those motor patterns that, hopefully aren't gone too long, since we've only taken 3 to 4 weeks off here. But for the most part, we're just rebuilding the arm. We're at a super low intensity, and man, we're going 50%. We're lightly increasing the volume, every couple of days. They're pretty much going 3 days a week for the most part, with a day of rest in between. And that's essentially what we're doing for the first entire phase. Again, we're building volume as we go. The intensity is roughly the same. Towards the end, we pick it up just a little bit, to prep for that next phase. And that next phase is what we call, the velocity or intent phase. Again, this is going to be case by case. So, if this is a guy that is already kind of a high velocity guy in high school, and we do have some guys that are mid 90s, might even touch higher than that this year. Those guys, obviously, we're not going to spend a lot of time in the velocity or intensity phase, right? We're going to get them to where they need to be intent-wise in order for us to increase their skill of pitching a little bit more. So if we come in, we got a guy that's mid-90s, again, we might take him through, 2, possibly 3 weeks of just maybe a shuffle where he's, slowly increasing his intensity on the radar gun, or maybe we're even doing like some roll-ins or step-ins on the mound just to lightly increase that intensity, again, just to get that arm ready to move at a high intent. But we're not going to spend a ton of time. We're not going to be doing running guns with these guys. We're not going to be doing, the outfielder janitor throws or anything like that, because these guys are already moving at a high intent. At a high efficiency. They are already good athletes. They're already timed up on the mound. They're already low to mid 90s. And we don't need to spend a ton of time on that intensity, because that is not their lowest hanging fruit. Going from 95 to 96 is not going to be as important as being able to command a fastball, to various parts of the plate. So we're going to focus on what that low-hanging fruit is for those types of guys. But the majority of our high school guys obviously do need a couple ticks of velocity. So with those guys, we are going through a little bit of a velo phase and intensity phase. Roughly 3 to 4 weeks is what this phase usually sits for us. And again, this is all the same stuff. So the shuffle pull downs, or even like a step in throw on the mound, right? And the reason that we're doing like a one shuffle pull down or a step in throw on a mound and not a run and gun or like a janitor throw or anything like that is because we personally are using this intensity phase to try to get this onto the mound blend, right? So we're not using it, at an extreme capacity to try to, get the arm moving super, super, super fast in this phase. That's not what our goal is. So we're not taking, a light, 20-yard jog to pull into a ball. That's not what we're doing. We're giving them one shuffle, or we're giving them one step in, because we are actually trying to minimize the amount of momentum that we're getting them in this velocity phase. And that's just simply because of the fact that on the mound, you're only getting, one step or even just a leg lift of a momentum to be able to create that momentum into ball release. So we don't want to give them a ton of more momentum just for the sake of getting a higher number. We're trying to be as close to that mound blend as possible during this velocity phase. So we really want to teach them how to, create that velocity and create that arm action from, either a one step or a one shuffle or a leg lift. So again, that's usually roughly 3 to 4 weeks there. Usually during this phase is Christmas week for how we structure things with this elite pitching group specifically. So, that's something to consider as well, right? Like, they're probably going to be gone maybe 3 to 4 days traveling. They probably don't have a chance to play catch, so that week following Christmas, again, we pretty much take a lighter day, the first couple of days we see them to, again, just briefly, rebuild that arm before going back to the velocity, day probably the next week, right? So my point to that is just to explain it is case by case. So some guys can stay on track. Some guys are traveling. So during those, holiday is when, we kind of have to make some adjustments between guys. And then from there, going into, January, late December and January, or for the group that started a couple weeks later because they had fall ball, that would actually be mid to late January for them. We are going into our preseason bullpens, right? And all this is we're getting them ready to get back on the mound. They're going through command training with a fastball. They're going through command training with off speed. If they don't have a great put away pitch or we need to develop one, this is the time frame where we are developing those put away pitches. This is the time frame where we are developing our skill in pitching and not, our velocity enhancement and things like that. So this is when we are actually working on the skill of pitching. Once that arm capacity has been built through the first phase, and then the intensity has been built through the second phase, and now we're in phase 3, which is the skill of pitching. And, a lot of guys now especially, are getting into their team practices a little bit earlier, usually around this phase. Some of the coaches, are letting them go through their complete, bullpen phases with us and letting us completely run all of their, preseason bullpens and just say, hey, take care of them, let us know when they're ready to go. And obviously that's ideal, right? Because we do see these guys day to day. We understand their movement, efficiencies. We understand the ways that they're trying to go about different things, and we can kind of help guide them and structure them, in a way that is going to help them long term. And some of the guys obviously, don't really have a choice at school, right? Like some of the guys are throwing at school and they're going through bullpens at school, in which case we will obviously not be throwing bullpens and will not be throwing. We'll kind of revert back to some mound work where we are trying to increase their intensity on the mound, efficiency on the mound, whether that is like with a med ball delivery drill or whether that is with a water bag or something like that to increase their movement capacity and movement efficiency on the mound. The reason that we use, water bags or med ball deliveries and things like that is because it gives us the ability to continue to increase our ability on the mound and increase our movement on the mound without having that additional stress on the throwing arm. So, if we've got guys that are having to throw at school during this last phase, this is when we would then revert back to just trying to get them as moving as efficiently as possible on the mound until their season begins. And then from there, we help them with maintenance programs all through the season, which pretty much lasts until, our shutdown period in the fall again. So that's pretty much how we structure the beginning parts of our throwing program for the elite pitching group. And it's very similar for our professional group. Obviously, the professional group, a lot of times we'll have longer. So we'll even have, 4 to 5 months with them in their off seasons that we can help, kind of structure an individualized plan based on their inning cap and things like that. So just a quick recap on how we structure that is phase 1, 5 to 6 weeks is we're building that throwing capacity, just getting the arm moving, getting, the arm swing back and the arm timing back. Phase 2 is our velocity or intensity phase, which is roughly 3 to 4 weeks. Again, depending on if they're a high velo guy already or if they're just a guy that needs to gain a little bit of velo. That's just, again, moving that arm at a higher intent, getting it ready to, move quickly in season. And then phase 3 is the actual skill of pitching. That's when we get to preseason bullpens, where we are developing secondary pitches. We are developing command and, again, just building that work capacity from the slope. So that's a rough draft of how, we structure that throwing program. Obviously, if you're a guy that's close, you want to get in, you need some help, whether it is in season, preseason, off season, whatever, we can help you and we will work with you individually depending on, kind of what it is that you're doing at school or with your organization or whatever that is. So if you have any questions at all, again, feel free to reach out to us, website, Instagram, whichever one. Thanks for listening.